It began with a newspaper ad for a jogging club and quickly became a front-page success story for the advent of Title IX. That's how Sue Williams started her cross-country dynasty at UC Davis, transforming a club activity into a varsity sport. Her success was impressive and almost immediate. About 50 women showed up in response to Williams' original ad in the school paper for runners. And shortly after, a freshman on UCD's club team finished second at the collegiate cross-country finals. That led the university to support a varsity program, thus paving the way for generations of female runners at UC Davis. When the NCAA added women's sports in 1981, Williams Aggies were more than ready, beginning a run of 10 consecutive years, finishing in the top 10 at the NCAA Division II cross-country championships. That accomplishment earned Williams the inaugural D2 Women's Coach of the Decade honor. During Williams' legendary tenure at UCD, her women's cross-country team advanced to the D2 National Championships every year from 1981 to 2002. That's 22 years and a staggering 21 top 10 finishes. Even more success came when UC Davis named Williams head coach of the men's cross-country program in 1991. Those Aggies advanced to the D2 National Championships in 10 of 12 seasons under her direction. A trailblazer for Title IX and women's athletics, tonight Sue Williams continues to make headlines in history as a USTFCCCA Hall of Famer.
Good evening. It's a real honor to be here, obviously, and particularly in this company and the impressive things I've been hearing. And I want to thank the organization for this entire event and my induction and for all they've done for our sport. I also want to recognize the staff of the USTFCCCA. You people have been working your heads off for 2 weeks, and I've been impressed. It's been a delightful few months since we got the notification. I've heard from so many athletes, and you all have too, that my mind has been filled with very vivid memories from the past 40 years. My family is here. They flew in from all over the country to be here. And I want to thank you, well, for a lot of things, but especially for coming. My husband, who's retired faculty from UC Davis, Keith, our two sons, Seth and Casey, who are on the faculty at Barnard and Princeton, respectively, and my wonderful brothers, Mike and Ben, and my sister-in-law, Elsie. So thank you. I have a few athletes here who were able to get away in the middle of a work week and come. And, you know, I'd introduce them, but I've kind of lost track of all the conference titles and All-American honors and all the other impressive things that have happened from this little table sitting over here, and they're representing all the other athletes that we've heard from. Nobody stands up at this podium alone. Of course, this happens because of the contributions of a lot of people. I have to honor my athletes, but I'll be talking about them in a little bit. I'd like to recognize can't name them by name, but my assistant coaches over the 40 years who contributed so much to the program, and I so value their friendship. And I'd like to thank Emma Peterson, who is the current coach at UC Davis, and already very successful with the men's and women's program there, and who, by the way, recently gave birth to their first child. So no one of us here tonight, no one was not deeply influenced by someone. So my coaching career was actually launched by my brothers sitting here because they played sports in the front yard. And what they did, I did, whatever it was. So I also understood competition by about the age of 4 because they gave no quarter in childhood games. You know, you do not let people win at Go Fish or rock throwing or anything else. You had to earn it. So I knew that early on. I'd like to mention my late uncle, H.B. Stewart, who was a huge influence. He was an excellent, excellent basketball coach and National High School Hall of Fame athletic director. And lastly, I'd like to recognize the head of the physical education department at Arkansas Tech, where I went to undergrad school. She was the first woman I knew whose profession was in sport, and she was a super positive influence. I did not get the opportunity to be an athlete because my career spans this really interesting period in women's athletics in that there were no girls' sports when I was in school. And I'll speak to that in a minute, but, and then I get to the other end, post-Title IX and all the amazing things we see in sports these days. So I was very lucky to be involved in that period. So I've coached a long time. And it's kind of nice, you know, because eventually you get to the point where you run out of things you have to learn the hard way, you know. Well, until you start repeating yourself. But I grew up in the 50s in Arkansas and Texas, and there was one girls' sport at some schools, which was girls' basketball. In that part of the country, it was very competitive. But other than that, school athletes were boys. There were some girls and women out there competing, but I didn't know about them at that time. They hadn't risen to much awareness nationally. I learned about them later. And so the athletes that I saw were boys and men. All the coaches that I saw were boys and men, including the coaches of the girls' basketball teams. All the professionals I saw were men. And while I love sports, I think my journey to becoming a coach, and a passionate one, was pretty unlikely. So this is the time to tell you about Miss Ingram. Miss Ingram was the librarian in my small town of Greenwood, Arkansas. She ran a tiny library in the basement of the courthouse. But she quietly took me under her wing, and I began to notice more books appearing that were in my interest area, and particularly books about Olympic track and field athletes. And those made a huge impact on me. I later learned that Miss Ingram bought books out of her own pocket at garage sales for me to read, to match my interest. And that made a huge impact. And one summer, when I was about 11, there was a brand new book in the library, which was a just released biography of Babe Didrikson Zaharias, the great female athlete who won multiple gold medals in the Olympics in the 30s. And later, I read about Wyomia Tyus and Wilma Rudolph, particularly Wilma Rudolph. And I suddenly had women's sport heroes for the first time. And the light bulb came on. They could do it. I could do it. And so I did. Miss Ingram lived all of her life in a very small town. She didn't change the world, but she certainly changed my world. And consequently, her influence was felt, I think, by all the athletes that I ever worked with. And I think this is an important point for everyone, but particularly coaches, because we work with young people in something that matters very much to them. And every small moment, every interaction can be important. To refer to an earlier speaker, coaching is done one individual at a time. Reaching people is done one individual at a time. So I was educated in Arkansas. After my BS degree at Arkansas Tech, I studied exercise physiology at the University of Arkansas, which later became my first college job. But again, there weren't really women's athletics happening yet. And I eagerly followed the track news, the Tiger Bells, Wyoming Attias. And so in 1972, I took a job at University of California at Davis to get to California, where the world of track club athletes was really happening. And I was pretty green when I started, but we all moved forward. And then along came Title IX. It passed in 1972 with the deadline for mandatory compliance in 1978. And by that 1978 date, there were 6 times as many high school girls in sports than there were in 1970. In 1976, Lucia Harris shot the first basketball by a woman at the Olympics. It was happening. And we're all aware that equity is an ongoing process, but it started then, and we were all on our way, all over the country. So most of my service in sport occurred in the NCAA when they began to govern women's collegiate athletics. And I saw that all of the decision-making positions in the NCAA were held by men. It was a men's organization, men's sports. But I wanted to be inside that process, if possible, when they began to govern women. And so began almost 20 years of service on various committees to that organization. And I learned every committee I was on, every group of people I worked with widened my horizons. All of my coaching career was at UC Davis. It was interesting in that we were a non-scholarship school in Division II. And of the 240 approximately Division II institutions, there were about 10 that were non-scholarship. Kim Dice coached one of them. So it was a challenging recruiting and competitive situation, but obviously our consistent record of success at the national level and other levels was an honor to the talent and work of the athletes. But not too long later, the opportunity to coach the men came along, the men distance runners, and it was very exciting and so gratifying that I wished I'd been doing it from the beginning. There are a couple of real foundation things I'd like to speak to about sport. We all, as coaches, learn ourselves and learn how we're going to go about things and what we want our athletes to learn. And one, of course, is absolutely you have to work hard. If you want to find out how good you can be in competition, which, as you know, I like it, then you have to work harder than other people. And you have to work on better technique, the best technique you can get. That's foundation, and that's what gives an athlete confidence. But also, there should be an atmosphere at every workout with the focus on the work. There should be an atmosphere of excitement and passion for what you're doing, and certainly in every race there should be some joy. I was reminded by one of my athletes how many times she had heard from me right before, in the huddle before a race. Now don't forget, you love doing this. But you have to remember that. And you certainly should race with joy. I still love competition. I think it's deeply exciting and fun. So the emphasis at UCD was on academics. And at one point, cross-country teams held 9 of the top 10 GPAs in the athletic program. Now that was cool. The men and women runners, you know, all of our athletes, their gifts are from their parents, their talent is from their parents. But their accomplishments are a product of what they've learned themselves, their work ethic, this mental strength they've developed, the belief in themselves to overcome obstacles because they've had to, because they want to do it so badly. Their belief in themselves and their commitment to their teammates. That's what produces results. So many of the strings of achievements that we got were almost outcomes. They came from that work ethic. So there are many things we could say about our sport, but I will stick to this, that all achievement in sport comes from the drive that is innate and can be nurtured to find out, to ask yourself the question, how good can I be? You know, how good can I be? That still gives me chills. So there's a lot in my heart for all of us, I think, and in our heads that we'd like to say about the sport, but I will say 2 more things. The relationships and the mutual appreciation and respect with other coaches is very significant. And the longer you coach, the more it means to you. It's a privilege to be a coach, but I think the greatest privilege of all of it is that you get to be a part of your athletes' lives forever, and they're in yours forever. So track and field is a great sport, y'all. Give it everything you can. So thank y'all for coming tonight, and take care of yourselves.